How I made my landlord and neighbor pay over 14K in fines for harassing me. This post was originally shared on malicious compliance, and I was told about this subreddit by about 20 people. I don't post much, but it seemed a better fit. New info: we bought Apple AirTags, 29.99 each, so not bad at all. And now have an alert set if they exceed 15 miles an hour. It has a built-in speaker and GPS tracking. Even if this idiot removes their collar, he won't realize the collars are being tracked. I have a fast car. I'd be behind him so fast it would make his head spin. First of all, before I start, I'm about 80% these two are involved with each other in romantic way. But I can't confirm. Now, I'm not an expert writer, nor am I going to spend an extended period of time making sure everything is perfect. I did a once or twice over, but there's just so much, and I'm still a little frazzled by the situation. I've had difficulty putting my thoughts on paper since elementary. This doesn't mean I won't do my best. I'm sure there's run-on sentences and improper spelling. I don't think this is a prerequisite for sharing your experience. So I travel a lot, and I live in an RV mostly full-time. I've stayed at the same park, however, for the last 9 months. I've had issues here. They have called the police on me for arguing. Not joking, they will ignore me in the office. All because there was a small mistake on the paperwork when I stayed here on an overnight 9 months ago. Something happened and they tried to use that to kick me out. However, the owner said it didn't matter and all info is pulled from the registration, so blaming the paperwork for being off by 1 year on the RV as a cause for eviction was far-fetched. There was a few other incidents, but I just figured it's cheap here and I can pay my rent over the phone. Who cares, and don't really plan on going anywhere, as where I am all the parks are full for snowbird season, plus I got a new job here. Anyways, we had a neighbor who was miserable. We could tell from day one. We also have 2 cats. They hang out on our porch mostly all the time. Occasionally they stray, but they're older and don't go far. So around 6 weeks ago, after 9 months of being my neighbor and never saying a word, he started acting very erratic. Randomly approached my wife as she was washing the car outside and got in her face and started screaming, saying that he dug cat poop out of the dirt behind his 1979 bus on bricks, and now he was going to put traps out and poison. Somehow management had heard the commotion, or he had told them to come, but they pulled up and quickly pulled him to the side to talk to him privately, refusing to even listen to us. We were very weirded out, calling him baby, sweetheart, etc. So they said it's his space, he can trap all he wants. If your animals are going onto his property, then that's your fault. Now this park is known to have so many cats they keep feeders by the front office. I warned them what they were doing was illegal, but they said, "We've been doing this a long time, we know exactly what we're doing. Call animal control if you don't believe me." I said okay, but he threatened to poison them, so I'm making a police report in case anything happens. I want him to be on record as having threatened them. They came, took the report, and oh man, did that make him mad. Still, at this point I hadn't figured out how to get my revenge. Animal control said it was legal and didn't do anything. We immediately got the cats microchipped and went to Lowe's to buy cat traps to teach our cats what a trap is and how to not go into one. Easiest trick I've ever taught an animal. Took 1 try, now they're terrified of anything resembling a trap. We were stumped. The cats were going stir crazy. Then 5 days later, she leaves a letter on my door, a self-help eviction, saying I have no choice but to leave immediately, and she was turning off the power on X day. I told her if she did I would call the local police, as that's a self-help eviction and you've already demonstrated malice by calling the police on me for asking you a question you don't like, assisting in the trapping of my cats while encouraging other cats to stay. Self-help evicting. And at one point she refused my CDC declaration letter, and I have all these things recorded on video. On top of all this, she says he needs to start his Harley and let it run for 45 minutes to warm up, even if he's not riding. That's what Harleys need, 2 feet from my bedroom window when he knows I work nights and I'm asleep. Essentially trying to force me out. Saying my dummy camera isn't allowed, however his real camera pointed at my space is. I was very prepared for an eviction threat, as these guys get away with so much, being that they can threaten eviction and people will just roll out in their RVs. Not me. No, not me. After the manager finally spoke to the owner, she realized she had dug herself into a hole and now couldn't evict me unless I had not paid rent, as they had refused to show me a contract or any rules the entire time I've been here. They don't like to have written rules, so they can change them as they need. the manager told me I was never allowed into the office unless to get mail and I must pay rent over the phone with a card. Still, though, I wasn't comfortable because my neighbor had now put out around 4 different traps, some as close as 1 foot from my property line. He still hadn't caught anything. So by chance I ran into a property manager while out shopping for my own trap, and he told me some interesting things. I did a little research and found out that trapping in Nevada is illegal without a permit. Too many protected species. So I knew the cats would never go into a trap. We did about 5 sessions with them and they got to the point when they even saw the trap they'd just hide. So I told the landlord it's fine, he can keep the traps. I had heard from a neighbor that he saw the manager opening up the storage room and loading his truck with animal traps. But he didn't know about our situation, so he was confused. This is when I put my plan together. I knew the longer he saw he wasn't getting his way, the more traps he would put out. And the more erratic he would become. He started revving his Harley for 45 minutes about 3 times a day while sitting inside with the radio on blasting. Then he'd get a chop saw and cut lumber into as small of pieces as he could and then stand 10 feet back and launch them into a steel trailer. I had around 2 GB of video from my cell phone, so I only actually caught about half of it. I knew he was losing it. I put a dummy camera facing his front door and that's what did it. He got too close and pushed my wife on camera. I had successfully driven him nuts, and had what I needed for a civil harassment suit. And I just let him stew. Every few days I'd notice a new trap. Finally, when he got up to 14 traps, his tiny RV space looked like a landmine of cat traps. My cats were and probably are still traumatized from the sight. My next move was to call the Nevada Fish and Wildlife. I emailed the picture of the traps. They finally showed up today and found his 14 traps. The fine is $1,000 per trap. These people also are cops that don't get to ever bust anyone, so they took it very seriously. They confiscated his traps and hit the park with $14,000 in fines. Afterwards she called me asking me why would I do that. I informed her I'm not done and that I'm building a case on her and her little friend for harassment. I've since been moved to one of the best spots on the property near the $1 million RVs next to the pool and hot tub with a bar and pizza about a 200 feet walk, and yes, I begged for a new spot to end this from day one, but she said we're booked up full all winter, we won't have even one spot until after Christmas. He scoffed at me, so I got him fired and sent back to his country. So let me preface this by saying I do feel somewhat bad about the events that transpired, but it would be eating my conscience to say I didn't do it on purpose, because I did. I started my first full-time job when I was 20, fresh off college and ready to take on the world. I resided in a Middle Eastern country, where people got brought in frequently by employers, and one mistake could cost them everything. I was outside this, because I was a resident of the place despite not being from there. Anyways, when I first started, I got along very well with my coworker despite the fact that he came off as a lot of bad things for me. We tried hanging out, but the more I got to know him, the more disgusted I became. He was sexist, a purist of his religion where he believes execution of certain people should be allowed, and he was extremely homophobic. But nonetheless, I tried making friends with him, because I was open to anything. In our office, we have a portable Wi-Fi that he took with him every day, free internet, and I never commented on this because I have my own, I can afford it and so can he. More on this later. The closer I got to him, the more he opened up, but in the worst ways. He would send me lewd images while we're in the office of women, talk about drug use, and sometimes disappear from work for hours on end while I'm in the office. Like I said, I was 20, I was still young and naive, and I tried my best to seem calm and friendly. I wanted to make an impression. This man, however, was the opposite. He was several years older than me, and acted like he was above me through every step. But I ignored it, because I wanted to be civil. Sometimes I would help him with his work until eventually his work became mine. He would just expect me to do it, without even lending a hand. I didn't say anything, I just did it. His missing from the office became more frequent. Sometimes he would only be at work for a measly 2 hours out of 9 hours, popping in and out, and the office manager is too chicken shit to say anything to the general manager. Then there's the lateness, where I would come in on time every day, and he'd come an hour late. Still, I kept my mouth shut. It escalated to him adjusting attendance records so it seems like he's not absent, even though his absences were frequent. Unfortunately, he was put in charge of that too. I remained quiet throughout all of this, remained civil until finally I spoke to the general manager about pursuing a different line of work. I was always into graphic design, and they needed to get some work done, so I offered to do it. But during this time, I couldn't afford much things anymore because I had to help pay for bills for my parents, so I usually just walked to work back and forth every day and limited my eating to once a day, meaning the Wi-Fi was no longer something I could afford. So, as an agreement, I could take the office Wi-Fi with me and work on designs from home. However, my coworker didn't agree to this, and pretty much attacked me with a barrage of insults. He scoffed at the fact that I needed the Wi-Fi to do design work and said I was a joke. I've suppressed majority of what the conversation held, but it went something like this. Me, I just need it tonight, you can have the Wi-Fi tomorrow. Him, why? It's not yours. Me, I need to do some design work. Him, yeah, me too. I need to do that too. So, leave it here. I couldn't remember much of what else he said, but there was a scoff after he said that. And he made fun that my designs sucked and that I should just stop while I'm ahead. My blood boiled and I reached a point of no return. I immediately phoned the office manager and talked about the situation and how if I don't get the Wi-Fi, I'll complain to the general manager, who did in fact give me his blessing, unlike this turd. He immediately called my coworker and told him to give me the Wi-Fi, which he did, and that was that. Except, I'm a petty person, and I'm not about to let some asshole get off with a slap on the wrist. The next day, I went to the head office and had a meeting with the general manager. I spoke to him about all the misconducts this guy had, how he's always late, never in the office, changes his absences, steals money sometimes, etc. I spilled my heart out on all his wrongdoings, showing the messages and photos I was sent during shift that I never asked for, and how I'm doing all of his work. It escalated to a point where he got brought into the main office for a meeting, where I proceeded to berate him in front of the manager, and he could only try to defend himself, but I was prepared. It turns out the office manager never even spoke to the general manager about his misconduct. Afterwards, he was brought back to the office having been yelled at by both my and the general manager. And I could say that's where it ends, except it's not. After he left, the general manager realized if I had been doing all the work, then why didn't I say anything? I responded that I was simply there to work, and to help. However, with what just happened, and the fact that this guy was getting paid more than me, I've decided that if he's here, then I won't be staying in the company. I gave him a choice, me, or this guy. The answer was obvious, because by the next day he was handed a termination letter, and another letter that states he's been booked a ticket and he has to head back to his home country within a month, and he's barred from entering the country for several years due to his public misconduct that was reported by a certain someone to the local authorities. I could say that's the end, but okay, this is the last one, I swear. See, he had a girlfriend back home, a fiancé more like, whom he has been cheating on. Funny enough, he added me on Facebook when we first met, and she proceeded to add me too, because he talks about me to her. Well, our messages wasn't just inappropriate, it showed details of him cheating on her, with me questioning him if that's a good idea. Every screenshot, sent. All the photos of the women he's been with, sent. She was livid, and I kept apologizing for keeping her in the dark, but that I thought she deserved to know at least. I haven't spoken to her since, but judging from the fact that her Facebook status no longer states she's engaged to him, is enough of a confirmation. I sent him one last thing before blocking him on every social media we've been connected in. You deserved this, shithead. It's been several months since then, and I'm thriving at work. I got a raise, I have better co-workers, and I'm getting a promotion. As for him, well, he's out there somewhere in the world, who knows, and who cares, right? We're no longer in the same country, so whatever else happens to him no longer phases me. Though, he did once send me a photo of his fake Italian ID, because he was planning on illegally migrating there next year. I'm on the fence if I should send it to the authorities in Italy or not. Just as a precaution, I might considering migrating there at some point. Don't want to pay me what I'm worth? Let's see how that works out for you. First time posting, but I have read a lot of these. So years ago, I was working for a laboratory that did a lot of testing for the military. It was a terrible job for a number of reasons. Despite having enormous responsibility, they never gave me credit for anything. In meetings with the department head, DH, they frequently blamed me for problems that they had caused but I had solved and they could not. They also hired consultants to come in and tell me I was wrong, only to have the consultants say I was right, and the consultants would get paid 1/4 of my yearly salary for 1 day's worth of work. I only stayed as long as I did because it was my first real job and I honestly didn't know better. But before I left, by their own standards, I was severely underpaid. HR agreed. They claimed there was nothing that could be done. Meanwhile, other people were given off-schedule raises. Well, I wasn't the only one that was underpaid. There were a number of others as well, but none of them were critical to the operation of the laboratory. Eventually, the DH went to the director with a list of all the underpaid people. I found out that my name was on the top of the list as the most underpaid person. Not surprising. Using this list, the DH got permission from the director for one-time raises. An announcement was made. Well, guess who didn't get a raise? This despite that fact that I had made massive improvements in some of their processes that easily saved them millions per year, and their budget was just over $10 million. I was livid. I had enough and decided to leave. They hired 2 people to replace me at more than double my salary. One of them had just graduated 2 weeks before. From what I understand, they had a lot of difficulty. That would have been enough for most people and maybe even for me for most of my life. But it wasn't enough for me then. I wanted revenge for what they had done to me. So, I arranged a meeting with one of the project managers, PM, from the department of the military that we had done our tests for. I casually mentioned to him that I had left my old job. He was shocked. Remember how I said they never gave me credit for anything? Well, the military PMS considered me an invaluable expert and could not understand why the lab had driven me away. They immediately pulled several $1 million worth of work from the lab and gave it to the competition. Several labs were involved, because they had no confidence that the lab could do the work anymore. When I ran into one of the lab managers, the only half-decent guy there, I casually mentioned my meeting with the PM and I could tell he figured out how the military knew I had left. It took them years to recover and honestly, I don't know if they ever really did. Last time I checked their web page, it hadn't been updated in at least 12 years. I would have been happy with a $20,000 raise. Ecstatic even. But they weren't willing to spend $20,000 and lost $2 million to start and more in the long run. I started my own business and now make at least 5 times what I would if I had stayed there until now, and more than 10 times what I was making when I left.